The prop for this commission was simple, a Warboss larger than Gaz, but also less armored. As a base, I decided on a Blades of Corn Korgoroth. He's massively built in the way an orc should be, which was good, but also had a lot of chaos elements which had to come off. The first to come off was the symbol flayed on his chest. To get rid of it, I took a sharp craft knife and carefully began to slice it away. Once it was off, I took sandpaper and polished his chest until the original symbol was all but gone. Another major chaos aspect of the model is the skulls embedded in his flesh. I took a carving knife and dug them out, careful not to damage the ring of flesh around them. I originally was going to fill and smooth them out with green stuff, but had the idea that later it would be cool to implant techie bits or snake cables into them to give the Warboss a cyborg feel. The layer of skulls on the model's shoulders I shaved down and later used Procreate to fill the gaps of. The legs of the Korgoroth are the digitigrade ones demons usually have, so to replace them I cut them off at the knees so they could fit into the armored lower legs Gaz uses. While my Warboss wasn't looking too bad, I realized at this point I'd run into a problem, which is that he's not noticeably bigger than Gaz. I'd expected at some point I'd expand his proportions like I do all my orc builds, but I actually kind of dug the weird Xeno proportions of the Warboss to this point. It's clearly not human, but still biologically possible, and I didn't want to mess with that by splitting him open and slotting in PVC sheets. Did I give up at this point? Find a new, bigger model to use as a base? No. I simply made a mold and grew it so that I had a larger version of the Korgoroth. He's roughly twice the size of the first, and in this case, instead of reducing the size of the chest to get rid of the chaos design, I filled it in with milliput for maximum swollenness. The first step I took, which I didn't catch on camera, was to attach the arms from a chaos defiler. They're appropriately sized and chunky. For both arms, I wanted a bit of a cyborg feel, that his arms had been augmented or replaced after some kind of major injury. The right arm I wanted to look mostly like armor, so I fit it to the joint at the elbow with only a little Procreate to make it look like the flesh was molded to it. The left arm I went full mechanical limb on by embedding it so that the bicep looks grafted to a piston jutting out from underneath. It's a small touch, but I think a cool one. The Gaz legs were now way too small for this larger sized Warboss, so I decided to instead use another pair of defiler arms. As with the arm, I wanted the one on the right to mostly look like armor, but for that to work it needed to be widened slightly. The arm is already in two parts, so I simply slotted plastic card between them and glued the whole thing together. I held off on gluing it to my Warboss just yet though, as I wanted to work on the pose of the left leg first. Instead of just the upper arm, I thought it would be cool to have the whole defiler arm integrated this time, much like the arm above it. Together, the two would tell a bit of a story, like maybe whatever explosion damaged the Warboss was worse on the left side and had done more damage there. To integrate the defiler arm, I cut off most of the back of my Warboss's leg, while careful to keep the front intact. I also shaved down the front of the defiler leg to be flat, and held it up to the model to see how it would fit. My plan was that much like the arm, it would look like the mechanical portion was jutting out from beneath, the gear portion having replaced the knee. I ended up cutting a little too much though, and the end product was almost entirely mechanical, with just a bit of the thigh left at the top. This was kind of annoying, but instead of starting from the beginning, I decided to simply use Procreate later to sculpt flesh over the mechanical limb. Legs worked out, I went on to arming the Warboss. The two guns I liked for him are both from a Leviathan Dreadnought. While this one looked more orky to me, the length of the barrels didn't work quite as well as this shorter, blunter gun. To make it fit, I measured it against the existing forearm and cut into both so they would fit together in a way that looked naturally integrated. To hide the joint and orc it up a bit, I also glued a metal plate to the side and a greeble that looks like a heat shield. Remember the holes I left from scooping out the original skulls? It was time to plug them. I started by gluing in the ends of various orc wires and cables into the holes. While this looked kind of cool, it was a little bit busy and distracted from the rest of him. What I liked better was gluing in round greebles that looked sort of like bolts and emphasized his cyborg nature. An idea that I'd had for a while was to not just leave his power claw empty, but instead have it crushing a marine. For the job, I picked this assault intercessor, as I thought the pose would look reasonably like he was struggling. To look really good, I knew I would need to show battle damage on the marine, so I used a gob of Procreate to temporarily attach him to the front of the limb, so I could figure out where the blades would be cutting through the armor. At those points, I cut into the marine with my knife to mimic the damage, then attached him back to the claw and arranged the thumb and forefinger blade. For the bottom blade, I really wanted to sell the shearing power of the claw, so I snipped off the marine's left leg where the claw would have sliced it off, then glued everything together. I attached the head to both the Warboss and the marine and lined them up so their sight lines met. I liked the idea of the Warboss glaring with Xeno's fury as he crushed the marine, and conversely, the marine being enough of a badass that a few missing limbs wouldn't faze him. To reinforce that idea, I glued in place this bolt pistol so he's pointing it at the Warboss. Now, here's the thing. This looks incredibly cool. But it looks incredibly cool for the Marine, a testament to the iron will and resilience of the Astartes, that even near death and missing limbs, he's still facing down an enormous Xeno Rage monster. The Marine becomes the center of the piece, and since this was a commission for a Warboss, that wasn't going to work. To switch the focus back to the Warboss, I took off his bolt pistol arm and replaced it with one with the hand snipped off. I also repurposed the Marine's head to be leaning back, as though he were being literally squeezed in two at the waist. To switch even more focus from the Marine, I gave the Warboss a different head, this one angled more to the side so he was roaring his fury up at his next target. It told a different story, this one of a monstrous Xeno beast that snatched up Marines, crushed them in his power claw, and flung them away heedlessly as he springs at his next enemy. A different aspect of the Warboss I'd been struggling with was how much armor he should have. While these Gorkonaut pauldrons fit him, they covered up the taut tendons of his neck that gave him so much character and really sold his roaring. I took it off and decided to simply double down on the cyborg nature of him. I scooped out most of his shoulders and glued to them two different pistons, one from the Orc mech gun kit and the other the ankle of a Redemptor dreadnought. While I could have simply used one for both shoulders, I liked the asymmetricality of using two. It felt orky. Between his shoulder blades, I glued in the engines from a Death Dread and layered on Procreate over the edge of them and the pistons so they would all look like they were pushing out from under the skin. The last aspect to complete the Warboss was his feet. For those, I used a Death Dread feet grown double in size through molding and casting. This is the section of a sheet of PVC that I planned on using to make it look like the Warboss was springing forward in the way a lot of GMW models do. I marked where I would need holes in both foot and sheet, drilled one out, and pinned the foot to the sheet with a pair of paper clips. And with that, the Warboss was done. He's one of my favorites so far, bestial and filled with rage, with a dynamic pose and a little bit of a narrative in the Marine being crushed by his claw. Though a small touch, it's an important one as it reminds you of his scale immediately and gives a real sense of his monstrous power. It's honestly a bit sad I have to give him away, but I can always make another if I really want. Speaking of, if you're interested in commissioning me yourself, there's a link to join my email list in the description box where I'll announce when I'm accepting new ones. Before that though, give this video a like, hit the subscribe button, or check out some of my other massive orc builds. Thanks for watching.